Hey pilots, welcome to part 2 of Hawken's items and internals. Last time we left off with an infiltrator build where I left out the air compressor, forcing me to stay on the ground a bit more. Now one mech that doesn't want to stay on the ground at all is the Berserker. This mech has the highest airspeed in the entire game, and my internals for it support that. You can really not get any more flight oriented than this. There's an air compressor to air dodge, a fuel converter to fly as long as possible, and even an air 180 for instant turnarounds while being airborne. Again, EMPs and orbs should be self-explanatory, and the replenisher might also be a viable internal to get to use that damage buff ability a bit more, but then you'll either have no fuel converter, and the Berserker has a relatively small fuel tank, or you cannot air dodge. On my Technician you can find orbs as well, only not for itself but for deploying next to repairing teammates that don't have the time to heal. The Blockade is also a very fitting item for the Technician, because while hiding behind one I can lock my heal beam onto it, basically healing myself while extending its staying power at the same time. This of course is even more effective with the ability activated. On the internal side we have again the air compressor and a basic fuel converter and the evasive device. This thing increases your walk speed by up to 15% the lower you get on armor. I previously had deflectors on this mech too, until I noticed that actually I don't boost that much with attack. I either fly or walk. So the evasive device seems a lot more useful, since it allows me to keep up more easily with the player I'm currently healing, and also makes me more difficult to hit for snipers, infiltrators, predators and the likes. Talking about snipers, we get to the last A-class mech. My Reaper currently has the same setup as my Flak Scout, simply because the slug rifle's playstyle in duels is pretty similar to that one of the Scout, with shields being your best friend as you're squishy and have a lot of burst damage, and one can never have enough repair charges. Mobility is what saves your life though, and that's what the internals reflect. Now mobility is also what sets the Reaper apart from its bigger brother, the Sharpshooter, which is slower but has more armor and a lot more firepower too. Of course, you always want to adapt your position with this mech, but my Sharpshooter play doesn't really put emphasis on evading. Don't know if that's a good thing or not, but I tend to snipe people from a safe distance, and if somebody gets too close I either kill them in a duel or at least damage them a lot, so that my team can clean them up. That's exactly when shields and EMPs come in handy. Once I get assaulted, I drop a shield and dance in and out of it, taking as many shots at my assassin as possible, until the item cooldown ends and my EMP is ready. I then EMP the shield, hopefully with the enemy in range. And even if I EMP myself too, my teammates should have come for my aid by now. I also have the armor fuser and basic reconstructor equipped, which proved to be a very viable combination for keeping my Sharpshooter alive without having to actively repair or use item slots for orbs. Now another B-class mech that is very good at shield dueling is the Raider. It's one of my favorites again. I have 3 instances of this mech, resulting from the diversity in primary weapons. We'll start with my most used build again. It's the one with the T32 bolt. This weapon is pretty similar to the flak cannon, only that it's chargeable for high burst shots in corner play and shield dancing situations, or spammable for higher damage per second. As both its primary and secondary weapon are shotguns, you will boost and dodge a lot, so as to not get hit, trying to break your opponent's turn cap and waiting for your weapons to reload. All of that is complemented nicely by shields, repair charges, deflectors and a fuel converter. and a replenisher to use the Raider's ability more often, because the Raider's ability is amazing. The Reflak 35, however, is more leaned towards DPS output and not exactly a weapon you want to force shield play with. Now you will still be boosting and dodging though, since you're a Raider, and that's why Deflectors and Fuel Converter won't leave their slots here either. I use this Raider for assassinations mostly. That's what the Scramblers are for, to mask my approach by causing chaos on the enemy radar. I blitz in, unload a Merv shot into my target, and let the Reflak handle the rest. You can melt most mechs pretty fast this way. Since by now most of the enemy team will be shooting at you though, it's about time to get the hell out of there. If you managed to do that, the Advanced Reconstructor is a godsend again. Still repair charges, because you never know. The last weapon on the Raider is the EOC Repeater. Again, massively different from the other ones. Now, while the Infiltrator, using the EOC Repeater as well, has the advantage that its target is almost always unaware of its presence and does thus not actively try to evade, that's a completely different story for the Raider. You are not invisible, you are not a small A-class, and either you're slow because you don't have your ability active, or you have your ability active and there are gigantic flashing light wings sprouting from your mech's body. Either way, you lead a life of hardship. To be honest, this is a pretty strange combination and also considered the most difficult mech to master in the entire game. Still, people manage to achieve great things with it. I mean, on the other hand, it has one of the highest burst potentials and a great ability. The core part of this build is definitely the failsafe again, because I will either use the Corsair KLA in Merv mode, so I have to get really close enough for my EOC pucks to damage me, or I will use it in grenade mode so that I can now receive self-damage from my secondary weapon as well. Air compressor and fuel converter are also very convenient on this mech too. Generally you want to keep your enemies at medium distance though, and while rushing people with the EOC Raider is fun, being rushed by someone else is not. Because your weapon reload times are so awfully long. So I found that greeting my would-be killer with an EMP to the face is a very effective way of prohibiting that. I could also imagine to use shields on this mech, but for now I'm sticking with repair charges. Now, a mech that I don't use repair charges on whatsoever is the Predator. I guess you could do that, but I found reconstructors and armor fusers to be way more fitting to the Predator's pace. On this Predator here, I'm using shields, since the charged breacher, the primary weapon I use most with the Predator, can shoot through them. I never really use any of its other weapons. And similar to the sharpshooter, if things start to get messy, don't worry, EMP. You know the drill. The second Predator is a bit better suited for maps with tight corners and corridors, sporting 3 detonators for maximum burst damage and a blockade to penetrate with the breacher. Since this one is going to take damage more frequently and often only have short breaks from combat, I only equipped the basic reconstructor here, making room for an armor fuser. My CRT recruit has a bit of a fun setup, with 3 holograms, basically because I barely use it anymore, since the assault is virtually the same mech, only with better stats. Save for Ultra-Violent Wednesdays, a community event where we get together on the Hawken TeamSpeak to play all sorts of custom game modes on the Cobalt servers. Among them, the Night of the Living Fred. Basically a zombie mode. It's quite fun to place holograms in potential hiding spots to keep people from using them. The G2 Assault, to be honest, I never really used that thing. I think I've literally played like one match with it and then decided that I don't like it. Still, I guess Replenisher and Air Compressor are a good choice for it. And Orbs are never a bad idea. The final mech on the B class list is the Bruiser. Now the Bruiser is sometimes considered one of the weaker mechs, since the damage output of the Hellfire missiles is abysmal. But I think the Bruiser has a lot of potential, especially through the underestimation by many players. Basically, the trick is to survive longer and deal more damage than they expect. In addition to the Bruiser's ability, blockades, turrets, and also the advanced armor fuser can help with that. Siege on Last Eco is this Bruiser's specialty, really. I suppose you could also use repair charges instead of either item. I mean, that's always an option. But yeah, anyway. That's it for B classes. And I'll see you soon for the final part of Hawken items and internals.